I am finally ready to be on camera and introduce myself because for years I have been helping people heal from trauma while hiding behind a logo. I haven't shown my face. No one's heard my voice. I haven't shared my personal story, but that's about to change. And honestly, I have been nervous about making this video, but I realized I do not have to be perfect. I just have to be authentic and real. So here I go. For years, I have been publishing books, building a brand, and helping thousands of people, all while remaining completely invisible. Just my logo and words on a page. And if you stick with me for the next few minutes, I'm going to tell you why I've been hiding and what finally brought me out of the shadows and how 20 years of trauma led me to create the healing content that's helped thousands of people just like you. So grab a cup of coffee, get comfortable, and let me officially introduce myself. My name is Leigh W. Hart, and this is my story. A few months ago, I flew down to Florida to meet with a marketing company. I had this huge dream of turning my books into online courses, just really scaling my impact and helping more people heal from trauma. And I was so excited about the possibilities. But then the owner of the company told me something that made my chest tighten with panic. He said, "You're going to need to share your story. You can't hide behind a logo anymore. People need to see you, hear you, connect with the real person behind these books." And I remember thinking, oh no, what have I gotten myself into? I just felt total panic because hiding behind a logo, that's kind of my thing. I have done it with every business, every nonprofit, every adventure I have ever started. I never wanted anything to be about me. I just wanted to help people and stay invisible while doing it. So sitting in that conference room in Florida, I realized something. He was right. You can't authentically help people heal from trauma while you're still hiding your own story. You can't guide others into the light while you're still standing in the shadows. So here I am, scared, vulnerable, but ready to share my story because there's one thing I've learned from my journey. It's that our greatest pain often becomes our greatest purpose. So let me take you back to where all this started. It was 2002, and I had just landed this amazing job that moved me from Tennessee to New York. I was married, I had 2 dogs, and we were trying to have a baby. We were young and life felt full of possibility, but within a short time, everything started falling apart in ways I could not understand. Both my husband and I got sick, really sick. Both our dogs were getting sick too, and one started having seizures. Both of us had mysterious symptoms that no doctor could explain, and the heartbreak that still brings tears to my eyes is that I had 3 miscarriages. 3 times I lost the baby that I desperately wanted, and we thought we were going crazy. Our house felt dark, and we joked about how it felt haunted because there was this just heaviness and darkness there that we couldn't shake. We didn't know why we didn't like being in that house, but for 2 years we suffered. Doctor after doctor, test after test, there's no answers. But then one day I discovered what was making us sick, causing my miscarriages and the seizures that took my dog. It was toxic mold. It had started to grow through the walls, the entire house, both stories, every room, the basement, the garage. Everything was eaten up with mold behind the walls and in the ceiling. When they removed a section of the wall in the living room to show me, I remember my knees literally giving out from beneath me. And that darkness that we felt, it was real. The house was literally poisoning us. But by the time I figured it out, the damage was already done. My marriage did not survive. Thankfully, we were renting, but we had to evacuate that house immediately, and most of our belongings were too contaminated to keep. I lost my dog to seizures and those 3 precious babies that I will never hold. I had to rebuild my entire life from scratch. Those 6 years in New York left me with nothing but trauma, overwhelming feelings of loss, and the desperate need to start over. So I moved back to Tennessee, closer to family and friends, with big dreams of rebuilding my life. But shortly thereafter, I got sick again. And this time it was worse, like way, way worse. And for the next 12 years, more than a decade, I woke up every single morning gasping for air, choking, sometimes vomiting every single morning. I became a prisoner in my own body, and I could barely keep my local business running. I was working just 15 to 25 hours a week when I used to work so much more than that. I rarely left my house except for holidays or important events. I had rashes that turned into blisters and open sores. I had chronic pain from head to toe, food sensitivity so severe I threw up constantly. And for over a decade, there were very few foods I could eat, and fruits and vegetables, they were the worst. My fingernails would fall off. Every couple of months, I would lose 1 or 2. I couldn't exercise because any rise in heart rate made me violently ill. I couldn't tolerate heat or even certain sounds. There was this ringing in my ears. My nervous system was stuck in constant fight or flight mode 24/7 for 12 years. That level of constant survival mode, it became my normal. It wasn't just a symptom, it was my entire existence. For 12 years, I set my alarm 2 hours before I actually needed to be awake, just to give my body time to calm down enough for me to start functioning for the day. It took me 3 to 4 hours every morning to get out the door. The first 2 hours I spent in what I called the gauntlet, just fighting through intense nausea and crushing anxiety, doing everything I could to calm my nervous system. And then, and only then, could I start my actual morning routine, like brushing my hair and getting dressed. Over the last decade, I went to every kind of specialist and doctor after doctor, and again, test after test. My blood work always came back normal, except for an elevated thyroid. No one could tell me what was wrong, and I felt like I was being poisoned from the inside out. And honestly, the symptoms are too long to list, but you know what the most heartbreaking part was? I started to lose hope that I'd ever figure it out or get better. After a decade, I was starting to accept it as my permanent reality. So I began planning my life around feeling sick forever. I needed to believe that I could still have a promising future despite all my limitations and symptoms, because I am not someone who gives up easily. In my darkest moments, when I could barely leave the couch, I found something that gave me hope. Writing, creating, and publishing books. I started with a children's book about 8 years ago just to give myself something to do, and I fell in love with the entire process. Here was something that I could do from my couch, something that made me feel productive and gave me purpose, even when my body felt like it was failing me. And as my symptoms got worse, and I could feel my ability to earn an income slipping away, publishing became my lifeline. It was my hope, my dream, that thing that made me believe I could still contribute to the world even if I never got better. And because I'd been through so much loss and trauma and isolation, I was naturally drawn to topics about healing, not just for myself, but for all the people in the world who were suffering like me. We all have different sources of trauma, but the pain, it feels the same. But here's the plot twist you probably didn't see coming. It took me 12 years, but I finally figured out on my own what was making me sick. And it wasn't some rare disease or mysterious condition. It was my breast implants. I know. It sounds almost too simple, right? But I was the poster child for breast implant illness. A decision that I made in May 2011 to help myself feel better after everything I had been through and lost in New York just ended up consuming 13 years of my life with pain, sickness, and trauma. Two things were happening in my body. First, my immune system was fighting those implants like foreign invaders for over a decade, keeping my nervous system in overdrive and creating a chronic autoimmune response that was slowly shutting me down. And second, even though the implants were saline, the outer shell was still silicone, sitting on top of all my vital organs, leaching toxic chemicals into my system 24/7, making me feel poisoned and sick. Some plastic surgeons do warn patients about breast implant illness, but not enough of them. And I hope that someday more doctors will stop dismissing breast implants when patients come in with unexplained chronic symptoms, especially when it's listed on their surgical history. But in February 2024, right before my 50th birthday, I had explant surgery. And the moment I opened my eyes after surgery, it was like someone had lifted a dark fog I'd been living in for over a decade. And even though my body had a lot of healing and detoxing to do, the relief was instant. And now, a year later, at 51, my thyroid is back to normal. I can eat real food again without nausea. I can exercise without getting sick. And the chronic pain from head to toe that consumed my life is almost gone. The blisters and sores on my skin are mostly gone. I am no longer sick in the mornings or living in constant survival mode. And my joy and my energy, they're back. But you know what? I spent the last 8 years I was sick doing something incredible. I published 9 books on healing trauma. Every single one of them was created and published from my couch while my body was falling apart because I refused to let my circumstances steal my purpose. Let me tell you about the books I created during those dark years because they weren't random topics. They became my roadmap out of the hell I was living. And my first book was called Don't Get Derailed by Your Attachment Style. Because after years and years of being sick and isolated, I'd developed an avoidant attachment style. I was pushing people away because I had nothing to give. But here's what I quickly realized. You can't help people work on attachment issues without first addressing the childhood wounds that created them. It's like trying to build a house on a broken foundation. So that's precisely where I went next, straight to the root of healing with books on inner child work and shadow work, both grounded in Carl Jung's psychological theories. So first, I published Reparenting Your Wounded Inner Child, and I've also got a version in Spanish. All right, and then I created an inner child workbook using cognitive behavioral therapy exercises. And then next, I worked really hard putting together this comprehensive, so big, this comprehensive shadow work journal, which is actually 2 books in one, with both beginner and advanced shadow work bundled together. These books became my lifeline. In fact, it was an advanced shadow work exercise that finally helped me connect the dots and realize it was my breast implants that were making me sick. Then one day a reader emailed me saying the shadow work was incredibly effective, but also triggering. Should she continue or take a break? I told her to give herself some time to process what she was learning from her shadow work exercises. But in the meantime, she could try some self-love practices. And she replied, "How do I practice self-love?" And in that moment, I realized I was giving people the tools to do the hard work, but no soft place to land. So I created a book on radical self-love. And it features 4 different therapeutic modalities. I'm so proud of this one. Another reader reached out saying he'd done all this inner work and could now recognize toxic behavior in others, but didn't know how to protect himself. And that inspired my latest book, Unmasking Dark Psychology for Self-Protection. Because it's one thing to heal, but you also need to shield yourself from future harm too. So every single book came from my own desperate need for healing and my readers' real struggles. I wasn't creating books from an ivory tower. I was publishing from the trenches, and that's what makes these books so powerful. However, here's what I want you to understand. This story isn't really about breast implant illness, toxic mold poisoning, or even the books I published. It's about what happens when you refuse to let your circumstances define your future. For over a decade, I was trapped in what I call a trauma timeline. I couldn't think beyond the next few hours because I was always just trying to survive. If I can get through the next hour, then I can rest. If I can just make it through this day, then I'll have 2 days to rest. Time became a blur. I wasn't processing how much time was actually passing. I had food in my pantry that expired 10 years ago. There were boxes sitting in the corner for 6 years that in my mind felt like maybe 6 months had gone by. My sense of time was completely distorted. Even now, when I recall stories, I have to stop and think, what year was that really? Or how long ago did that actually happen? Basically, I was living my own real-life Groundhog Day. I was waking up to the same nightmare every morning because the mornings, they were the worst. But post-explant surgery, I finally started healing physically. But mentally, I was still struggling. My mind was stuck in anger and grief. Those were my 2 big emotions. I was furious about the time I'd lost. I felt like I'd gotten too old to achieve my dreams, which, by the way, I don't believe that anymore. I'd spent my entire 40s sick on a couch while life just passed me by, and I was furious about all the doctors who still think breast implant illness isn't a real thing, which is just mind-blowing to me. But you know what changed everything for me? Reframing my story. Instead of seeing those 20 years of combined sickness and trauma as something that happened to me, I started seeing it all as something that happened for me. And that shift in perspective was everything. Suddenly, I wasn't a victim of my circumstances. I was someone who had been equipped with deep wisdom about trauma and healing. Someone who could help others not just from academic knowledge, but from lived experience. I had to overcome my anger, my scarcity mindset, and my fear of being seen. I had to learn to see my scars not as evidence of what broke me, but as proof of what I survived. And that brings me to why I'm finally ready to step out from behind the logo and share myself with you. When I started receiving video testimonials from readers about how my books had changed their lives, I was moved to tears seeing the actual faces of people I'd helped. It hit me that I'd been connecting with thousands of people while hiding who I really was. My trauma isn't more profound than yours. We all have a story, something we're overcoming or trying to overcome. But trauma, it comes in all shapes and sizes, and the pain, it feels the same. Here's what I want you to know about what's coming next. I'm not just emerging from behind a logo. I'm emerging from 2 decades of isolation with a fierce determination to make up for lost time. I've already recorded online courses for inner child healing and self-love. I'm working on shadow work and dark psychology courses next. I'm planning to start hosting a 12-week live masterclass 4 times a year. And hopefully my first in-person workshop or retreat will happen by the end of next year. I'm preparing outlines and notes for books on emotional intelligence, critical thinking, and eventually a series on grief trauma. I have 2 to 3 years worth of goals on my vision board, and every time I look at it, I'm just filled with joy and anticipation to complete that work. So here is my promise to you. I will always be authentic, honest, and compassionate. I'll share both the good and the bad because healing isn't a linear process, and I'm still very much on this journey myself. I'm still unpacking 2 decades of trauma and still learning how to live without feelings of fear and scarcity. I also still get anxious from time to time. But that's exactly why I can help you. I'm not speaking from a place of having arrived. I'm speaking from the messy middle of transformation, and that's where real healing happens. Nearly 10 years ago, a dear friend gave me this small canvas that says, "Own your story." And she encouraged me to share what I was going through. And I hung it on my wall, and I have stared at it for over a decade, knowing that someday I would share my story, but not understanding what that complete story was just yet. Well, 10 years later, the timing is finally right, and this is me owning my story. So if you're watching this and you're struggling with trauma, attachment issues, childhood wounds, or just feeling stuck and isolated like I was, I want you to know that your story isn't over. Your pain can become your purpose. Your scars can become your strength. There is hope on the other side of your pain, and you don't have to figure it out alone. Check out my books, my courses, or just follow along on social media as I continue sharing this journey. But right now, I'd love to hear from you. If any part of my story resonated with you, drop a comment below and let me know. And if you've already read one of my books or taken one of my courses, I would love to know what resonated with you most. What part of your healing journey are you working on right now? Well, this is me, Leigh Hart. And I'm so grateful you're here, because for the first time in over 2 decades, I'm not hiding behind anything. Thank you for letting me finally introduce myself. This is just the beginning. And hey, you are worth every bit of effort you are putting in. So keep nurturing that beautiful soul of yours.